going to talk about understanding the modern customer journey using Pardot and Marketing Cloud. But everything that I'm going to be talking about is pretty much vendor agnostic, a lot of it. So I might use certain terms that are specific to Pardot, but most of it is going to be strategies that you can use across the board. Like I said, I am in Austin, Texas. That's where a lot of us at SLX, our SalesLabX, are going to be at. But we are nationwide, and we do all work remote right now. To my dismay, because I love meeting people in real life. Maybe y'all can come down here and hang out with me one day. So we work. I am in Austin, Texas. We have a subscription service where we actively manage people's Pardot and Salesforce instances for them. So everything that I talk about today, I go into organizations, I help implement, execute, and manage with a subscription, and the sun's really hot. I had a child about a year ago, a new child, and my room got converted into the baby's room, and I am in a shed in my backyard with a very well-placed back scene. So the sun's going to be in my head if y'all see that. But yeah, so we basically manage people's Pardot and Salesforce and Marketing Cloud and Marketo and HubSpot for them. So everything I talk about today, if y'all are like, hey, I would love if Milton came in and did this for me instead of sitting at the sidelines, that's what we do. Because of that, at any given moment, we're actively managing tens of millions of Salesforce leads and contacts for accounts around the world. So we have a huge data set of what's working and what's not working. I don't know any other organization that does it like us, but obviously I'm going to say that. So we're not just going in and doing implementations and leaving. We're actively managing, meaning that we're accountable to a number, not just an implementation. And the number that we always hold ourselves accountable for, North Star, is pipeline attribution. So to date, we have generated over $100 million in pipeline attribution to our subscribers. And if any of y'all are in marketing or in ops, you know that sometimes proving attribution is as hard or harder than actually getting that attribution juice. So we're very proud of that too. Man, we got a good sized audience today. It's nice. Cool. So as I go through this, if y'all have any questions, comments, or concerns, there is a little chat on the bottom. So feel free to ask your questions on the chat. I love being interactive. So even if I don't answer the questions directly as I go through, sometimes I'll stop and I'll answer the questions. If not, I'll definitely do it in the end. So if something I'm saying seems too high level, you want me to dig down a little bit deeper. If you think you already tried it and you got punched in the face, tell me how you got punched in the face in the chat. If something I say doesn't really pass the smell test, if I'm making it sound easier than it is, put it in the chat. I'm doing this in real life, so I love hearing that feedback. So you can ask that in the chat, and then I'll make sure I answer that real time or towards the end. Cool. I'm horrible at slides. After this, you'll get a couple of emails from April, who's in our marketing team. Please do not unsubscribe from those emails. That's how they allow me to spend time ranting and raving with y'all. So the thing that you'll be getting some emails about are our ROI sessions. So basically, if you want to book 45 minutes or 60 minutes actually with me, I will come into your instance. You'll share your screen. I'll ask you to build me some Salesforce reports. I'll walk you through those, and then I'll basically pinpoint and send you a little one-page document on where I think you should start with your personalization, your automation, where you're going to see the best ROI. And if you book within 48 hours of showing up to the webinar, you'll get assigned to me. If not, you might get assigned to somebody else. But everybody's kind of cool, but not everybody's fun. So that's that. Cool. And then, yeah, if you have any budget left over, you'll help fund this whole operation. So thank you. I'm going to start off today by quoting one of my favorite people, me, and one of my favorite quotes. So my North Star, other than revenue attribution, I guess revenue attribution is my lagging indicator, but my leading indicator is I think it's awesome when you make somebody feel like a small part of the world is built with just them in mind. That's like my favorite thing to do, those aha moments. That's why I'm in marketing automation or automation. And yeah, that's my North Star. and how this ties into y'all, if you're not so heady and esoteric, I guess, as me, is one way to measure that, which is going to be something we talk about today, is going to be how do you send the right message to the right person at the right time? Okay, that's a more capitalistic way, I guess, of saying this. Is how do you send the right message to the right person at the right time? My belief is if you do this, you make people feel like this, and it turns less into a marketing sales process and more into a discovery journey where they get to discover things on their own. So this is what we're going to be trying to do. This is what we're always trying to do as marketers or ops, as sales reps, as leadership. And why is this important to do? I want to start off by talking about some changes that have happened. It has nothing to do with today, but I like the Trojan horse any new information I learn as I go through it, right? Is one thing to keep in mind is that Google, if y'all do email, if anybody in here is email, or email is a big channel, Google, which is Gmail, and they own Gmail and and Google Apps, they've made some big changes. What I would say the biggest, I'm a geek when it comes to deliverability, so obviously I think it's big. But the biggest changes that they've made in a long time to how they analyze spam and how they track promotions and how you land in the inbox. So what they're basically doing is, if y'all have ever done SEO or looked at the SEO space where it's this black box where Google just gets to decide based on their algorithm what gets placed into the inbox, that's effectively what they're doing with inbox placement with Gmail and Google Apps, especially on the B2B side and the B2C side. So what they're doing now is that if your emails aren't getting open really quickly, you are getting deprioritized in their inbox algorithm. If you are getting unsubscribed at any rate, I think the rate is 0.3%, so like less than 0.5%, you're getting hugely deprioritized. If people aren't opening it, if they're not engaging, if they're moving it to spam, these are things that had tangential effects before. Now it's seeing huge effects. I track inbox placement for hundreds of orgs. This change that they rolled out a couple of weeks ago has been the most massive thing I've seen in a really long time. So if you're not tracking engagement and you're not segmenting and really, if you're just batching and blasting, you're going to get punched in the face really, really hard, really, really soon. I've noticed that across the board. I've also heard whispers, and I've seen this to be somewhat accurate. Google's famous for this black box. I'm a big fan of economic incentives. Google is trying to sell a lot more Google ads in Gmail. So, they want to kill the competition, which is organic, kind of like what Facebook and Meta did for organic posts on social. Google's trying to do with Gmail. But there's also rumors or in the mill right now that I've seen tangential evidence for that even having the open tracking pixel on your email is reducing your deliverability, right? So on a lot of and in Pardot right now, there isn't a way to turn that off. But a lot of the one-to-one email platforms that I've used and I'm currently partnering with, they have turned off open tracking. Okay, so now, first of all, open tracking, the data was a vanity data for a really long time. I'm talking about like open tracking, open rates. But now Google's going to start just basically saying if you're tracking opens, you might be spamming or promotions, which is, I don't want to speak, without having a lot of nuance here, but there's just basically a lot of changes happening in Gmail now. So this segmentation and personalization is very important. If you are not personalizing your subject lines, your segments, all of those things, those are going to come to bite you in the butt. And remember, whenever you talk about inbox placement or your email domain credit score, even if sales is sending out like batch and blast emails, like out of something like ZoomInfo, Clearbit, Apollo, Outreach.io, SalesLoft, all of those are tools that I'm partners with and we're partners with and we're certified in. But just know that is also impacting your Pardot deliverability too. Okay, so it's all one universe. It's not this like separate bucket. Cool. And if anybody wants to nerd out about this separately, we can talk about that offline or on an ROI session, which I am going to put a link to in the chat. Oh, I already did. Okay. My job's done. Okay. And then another reason I want to talk about personalization and how do you make sure and to ensuring that you're sending the right message to the right person at the right time is that if you've come to any of my AI sessions, you know that the amount of content that's going out right now is bonkers. So, like, it's just a lot of noise that's happening. So if you really want to be able to break through that noise and talk to decision makers and talk to people and land in their inbox and actually have a conversion rate that's not leaking all over the place, people are getting bombarded with so much noise right now that you have to personalize. It's no longer an option or a nice to have. It is a mandatory thing to do, and your conversion rates are going to slowly start diminishing. I'm working with a lot of orgs right now that are basically startups or lean orgs that are attacking legacy B2B spaces, which just basically personalized content because they're able to outperform and outmaneuver traditional marketing orgs, right? So you have to get more personalized because there's so much content out there right now. Okay, another big thing, this is the last scare tactic, so you think it's important, is that efficiency is big. Efficiency is big in all the orgs that I've gone into this year. The big motto is efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. I see marketing orgs, ops orgs, design orgs, leaning out because they want to get more efficient. You have to make sure that you have an eye on efficiency. And the number one culprit that I see to inefficiency in organizations is the spray and pray method. Hey, I got a 10% open rate. I got a 13% open rate, which really means what? If you got a 10% open rate, that means you have a 90% failure rate, right? Right? I used to work in public education before, and y'all are really, as a 6th grade teacher, but y'all are really giving them a fight for their inefficiency, right? So like the spray and pray approach is getting wildly inefficient, and before there was no cost to your inefficiency. Now there is a cost to your inefficiency, not just from an ROI perspective, but from like your brand's perspective and the Google deliverability. So the spray and pray is super inefficient. You want to make sure that you solve for that. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I'm going to keep going. All right. So how do we send the right message to the right person at the right time? That's what we're going to talk about, and we're going to break down the customer journey. So I have this broken down into 4 different sections. If y'all don't ask me questions in the chat, that means you're not understanding what I'm saying, and I'm going to feel nervous and anxious. Okay? So please ask me a question in the chat, or drop an emoji and tell me I'm doing well. But I'm going to need some feedback. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about how do you understand the customer journey? How do you get a grasp of it? How do you know how your customers want to be talked to? Okay? And I currently have a soon-to-be 17-year-old in the end of this month, and I have a 1-year-old, so understanding wide audiences is a thing that I work on all day long, right? So we're going to talk about understanding your customer journey. We're going to talk about how do you leverage personalization. Thanks, Brie. And then we're going to talk about how do you leverage personalization, and then what are blind spots I want you to watch out for. And then I want to talk about the thing I always talk about, which is automation is not automatic. It's not an end point. It's a start point, and you need to make sure you have the infrastructure to continuously iterate on this. Cool. So let's talk about understanding the customer journey and how do we do that. Okay. So the first thing you got to try to understand is what is moving the needle. What is moving the needle? What do you mean by personalized email? Yeah, I love that. I love that, Scott. Thank you, Scott. Scott's asking a question, which I love. I'll come back to it. And Scott's question is, what do you mean by personalized email? Is it putting the recipient's name on the email? I love that. There's a cool, so it's like, hi, Mr. John Doe, right? I saw this comic a while back, which I share a lot. I wish I could find it, but it's basically like a person at the cash register, and it's like, please give me your first name and your email address so I can send you personalized content that use your email and your first name. My daughter always makes fun of me. I'm the funniest person to me. But like, yeah, so like, yes, Scott, that is a way of using personalization, but I want to get deeper. I want to get more nuanced. I want to talk to their soul. I want to like scream at their inbox, you know? I want them to make sure that subject line looks like it was built with just them in mind. So yes, I do mean first name, things like that, but let's think about how do we take it a step further from there too, okay? So the first step I want you to do is I want you to zoom out and I want you to think about and try to understand what is moving the needle in your customer journey. What I see a lot of times is that so many orgs are used to building the plane while they're flying it that they've never taken time to stop and zoom out and actually understand what is the thing that's moving the needle. What is actually stopping the conversions? What are they going to do to actually get ROI? Now remember, every time I say something, I want you to remember the inherent bias I have, right? I go into organizations and I work with them for 12 months. So I basically parachute in, I look at their system. So obviously to me, it always looks like y'all haven't done enough zooming out. But that's because that's what I do for a living, right? So I want you to pause and I want you to think about what is actually moving the needle. What are the variables in my customer journey that if I change, I can actually get the maximum amount of ROI for those activities that I'm doing? The number one mistake I see all the time, and I love saying number one mistake, so I'm going to say that over and over again, and you'll see I have a lot of number one mistakes, but is that people spend the same amount of effort on a lot of different activities. What I want you to do is I want you to narrow your focus in, and I want you to focus on the things that are going to move the needle the most. Okay? How do I understand, Milton, the things that move the needle the most? I'm building webinars, I'm building white papers, I'm building these emails, I'm going to conferences, I'm listening to sales yell at me about the lead quality. How do I know which one of these activities that I'm working on is actually moving the needle the most? When you think about all the activities that you're doing, the first step I like to do is I like to document all of the activities that I'm doing, and I want to normalize or try to bucket all the activities that I'm doing. Right? Y'all will know if you've seen any of my other content. I'm a big fan of journey mapping. Right? So if you haven't done this yet, I love, there's a bunch of free tools out there like Lucid or Visio. I don't know if that's free or not. But I love mapping out your full customer journey using a tool like this. Right? And then I want to document what are all the different touch points that marketing is spending, or you, whatever role you're in, is spending most of your time doing. I do this with myself all the time to see if there's efficiency points even in myself. Right? So I document what I'm doing. Then I like to document just in a Google Sheet all the activities that I'm doing and how much time I'm spending on those things. And I like to do them in big buckets. Okay? So I want to see like what are the activities I'm doing, and then I want to try to see like what is the impact of those activities. Okay? What are the impact of those activities? Then I want to come up with a thesis statement. I think if I personalize well, that's not even let me try to use Scott's example here. I think my product is hard to sell. There's a big education process, and people are worried about if I actually understand their pain point. In order to really get them to understand that I understand their pain point, I have to make sure that they know I'm talking to them. Personalization is important in that aspect. Maybe that's it, right? And the different buckets of why they think I don't understand them is their role in the organization, their industry in the organization, or how long they've been in the organization. Maybe that's a thesis statement. Something like that, right? One of those three things. I want to come up with that, all right? The best play, and if you're stuck for like how to come up with a thesis statement, ask me some questions in the chat, please, is that you can always do it or try to do a retroactive analysis. Okay? So I like to say, okay, of all the leads that I created this year, what are the ones that did not convert into the opportunity broken down by title or by industry? See, as marketers or ops or human beings, we have this natural bias that's called survivor bias, which means that we want to look at the people who are going through our funnel. We want to look at the people who are converting. What I want you to do is I want you to flip that around, and I want you to do a retroactive analysis on the people who are not converting, because that bucket's always going to be the biggest bucket. And I want you to think about, okay, I want you to pull a list of all my leads this year that are in disqualified status. If you can't pull that report easily, ignore the rest of my conversation today, because you ain't even ready to do this yet. And I'll talk about that in the second thing. I want you to pull the report of all the disqualified, and then I want you to break it down into different segments: title, state, department, annual revenue, lead source. And I want you to look at which one is converting the least. And I want you to do that retroactive analysis. Is there a template report that allows you to do that? No. You know, I hate to be so flippant, but like the reports, the biggest frustration with Salesforce, Pardot, a lot of these enterprise-sized tools, even Google Analytics for a large part, is that like they're this black box where you can build whatever you want, but the out-of-the-box reporting doesn't really do anything. Right? Like, you know, like, I don't know. It's like really, it's like, so there isn't a I don't know. I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but yeah, no, I don't think there's one that does it, but out of the box. But if you book some time with me, I can show you how to build something that triangulates there, right? But here's the bigger thing. Even if you run this report that I tell you to run, right, you might not have any data there. Okay? You might not have any data there. So a lot of times what I see is that people don't have a data hierarchy that they've come up with. Meaning, these are the 3 different variables that are going to really tell me enough about my persona, and how do I collect that data? How do I collect? If I know title is going to really move the needle, I need to make sure I'm collecting title in every single way possible. If I know industry, y'all all gave me your industry in order to sign up for this webinar today. Right? And if I already had your industry, you didn't see the industry field. Right? I'm using what's called progressive profiling there to collect the information that I need at the right time. Right? But the first thing you need to do is, what moves the needle? Do you have that data or not? If you don't have that data, you need to come up with a data hierarchy of what is the most important pieces of data for you. And then you need to come up with a strategy on how to collect that data. You need to build the infrastructure around that data hierarchy. Why is this so hard to do? Why do I see so few organizations doing this? Why? Because marketing, sales, IT, ops, your SEO provider, your pay-per-click provider, they all have to be alignment on a strategy. And very rarely in organizations do I see that. Right? So like, this is why I guess for someone like me, who comes from a culture with, you know, where we have multiple lifetimes, and we reincarnate, that long-term thinking is very important. You have to have that long-term thought pattern where you're like, okay, this is the data I need, and how do I build the infrastructure around it? How do I make sure that my LinkedIn ads are collecting the same information that I need from my nurturers? How do I make sure all of these sides are talking to each other? Okay? Once again, remember my bias. Setting up the sessions with all these stakeholders and making sure they're aligned is my full-time job here on my account. So like, obviously I'm going to think I have the coolest job and the most important job in the world, right? But I definitely think, can you give an example of a company who's doing this well and has a great aligned strategy? I love that. HubSpot. My Salesforce AEs who are going to see this recording are on here right now are going to be like, Milton, this is why you don't get any leads from us. But yeah, HubSpot does this really well. And I'll show you that too. Any company that you see that is in a competitive space and sends out a lot of content and is using UTM parameters on their content is doing this well. Because that's the only way they're justifying the content team. But I'll show you the HubSpot thing that I really like too as an example here, right? So yeah, HubSpot's a good example. And then build that infrastructure well there. And then a lot of times people think that like, hey, Data is important. Milton, tell me what the data is saying, or data is going to tell me my strategy. Data, all of data, the acquisition, the analysis, and leveraging is all part of your strategy. All people want to do when they come to me, or in general, is they just want to leverage. They want to leverage, they want to leverage, they want to leverage. How can I use data? I want to use data. I want to buy data. I want to personalize. I want to segment. I want to do all of this stuff. They spend very little time on this right here. What is your strategy around data acquisition? What is your strategy around data analysis? Okay. If you're in B2B, you should be using a data augmentation provider. Okay. So this is, and by B2B, I mean businesses selling to other businesses, whether that's healthcare, financial, whatever that thing is. You should be using a data provider like ZoomInfo, Clearbit, Apollo, all of these data providers that basically scrape the open web for like firmographic information, right? But yeah, you want to talk about your acquisition analysis and your leveraging that. Ask some questions in the chat. Okay. Okay. Last two things when we talk about how to understand your customer journey, right? Is that there are three main things that I want you to think about that have to, like the three tent poles. And I've done sessions and recordings. They're creating a library right now of all my sessions that I've done historically. But like, if you go through your email, you might be able to find them. But basically, three main things I want you to think about when you talk about like how do you get a good grasp of your universe is UTMs, Salesforce campaigns, and contact roles. UTMs, campaigns, and contact roles. Okay? Those are the three things as far as like infrastructure item that you're going to apply no matter what. Right? So when Bree and Kamala ask me questions about like what are overall best practices or like ideas, I can give you some of them towards the end. But the thing that I know for sure is that these are tentpole terms and infrastructure items that most orgs that are effectively leveraging data and personalization are doing well. UTMs, Salesforce campaigns, not Pardot campaigns. Those are meaningless. No, I'm kidding. And then contact roles. Those three things you have to have a strategy around. You have to make sure you're collecting and deploying properly. Okay? If I have time, I'll show you the difference between those three because they're, and these two especially because they get very confusing. Okay. Now, my old Indian dad adage before we go further into activating. So like, don't feel overwhelmed about a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about right now because I know a lot of this stuff is infrastructure items and then people always are like, well, it's way too late to do that. So I'm just going to keep sending out that email every Tuesday and I got a 20% open rate. Here's the thing, for your career, for your soul, for the universe, for the betterment of less garbage content out there, take some time to do this, right? It does really help and it gets your muscle memory in and at least at a bare minimum, spend 1 hour a week building infrastructure. And if you're not sure where to start on the infrastructure build out, because it's always easier to click send on an email, book an ROI session with me, right? Crystal is asking me in the chat, the personalization topic is really interesting. When we have tools like Outreach, SalesLabX, etc., they are doing personalization at scale. But how do you use those tools to speak to someone's soul? Love it. I love it. I love it. I love it, right? So basically, Crystal's saying, how do you manage this thing of like scale versus personalization if it lives in this dualistic state where they're competing with each other constantly? Like personalization versus scale, personalization with scale, right? My motto is do what's unscalable first. Do what's unscalable first. So I run SDR teams, I run sales teams, I run marketing teams, I run ops teams, right? And whenever I run SDR teams, I never let them automate anything till they manually do it. And when I do rollouts and if I do a rollout of a new lead process and I'm managing that rollout for a sales team, I don't automate anything up front. They're manually doing it. Then I analyze the reps that are doing it really well unscalably. Then I use tools like AI, data scraping to basically automate those best practices that the human being are doing. I'm basically using Hive intelligence to get the best practices there, which is always going to be much better and is going to outsmart any of your competitors because they don't have the infrastructure to do that, right? So like basically, Crystal, I would say do the unscalable, do it manually, look at the data on a regular basis, and then try to figure out how to scale that. People start with, is it scalable or not? You know, I sold door-to-door bulk meat as one of my early careers. Like it's inherently unscalable, right? So you got to do that, right? As a vegetarian, if somebody wants to talk to me about that one day, right? As a vegetarian, okay. So now let's talk about how do you leverage this data and this customer journey for personalization. How do you leverage this data and how do you leverage personalization? Okay. The biggest thing that I'm seeing is people, like I said before, people don't know where to start. So the first thing I want you to think about is breaking down in your customer journey or in your funnel, where is the most leakage or where is the biggest opportunity where your conversion is going down, like they told me to start using the word leakage. Where is the place where your conversion rate is the lowest in your customer journey? Is it lead to opportunity? Is it website visitor to form submission? Where is the biggest fall through in your funnel? No, Bree, come back. You can't ask questions on the replay. Okay, but yeah, so where is that happening? And then you have to try to figure out, how do I get back to my thing? Okay, where is the conversion not happening and who? Okay, so now I know where my biggest black hole is happening. And then now, how do I dig that in and get more nuanced segmentation of who is dripping, I need to come up with a better word for leakage. But like who is not converting the most, right? That's the first step. Then I want you to triage by ROI opportunity. Okay? This is the thing that I see a lot of people not doing. Okay, if I was to spend 8 hours a day, or not 8 hours a day, because most people don't, 8 hours a week working on something, what part of this am I going to be laser focusing on for the next 90 days? What part of my customer journey am I going to be laser focused in on the next 90 days? Or assign that laser focus to me, right? And then I want you to decide that based on the ROI. Now, when we talk about getting into the nitty-gritty of execution, one of the biggest things that I see people not using enough is the unsexiest thing, which in Pardot or account engagement is called dynamic segments. Okay? So in Pardot or Salesforce or Marketing Cloud, there's something that you can build that's called dynamic segments. And I see people, and it's on every version of Pardot. It doesn't count any cost any extra. And basically what you do, if you haven't used these before, is that anytime somebody meets a certain criteria, they get automatically added to a certain segment. So if somebody hasn't opened an email in 30 days, they get added to a segment. If somebody visits your pricing page on your website, but they don't have an open opportunity, they get added to a segment. If somebody clicks on 7 emails, registers for 2 webinars, but has never visited the pricing page, they get added to a segment. And it's happening dynamically all the time. The entrance and exit criteria is dynamic. So people are getting added to this list and exited from this list. If somebody hasn't opened an email in the last 90 days or 100 days, or they haven't clicked on an email or visited your website, don't you think you should put them on a specific drip to try to get them back engaged? Shouldn't that be automatic? Shouldn't that be running in the background for you? That's dynamic segments. It's been a feature of Pardot since 20 years ago, right? It's just how do you leverage it as part of your overall strategy, okay? And remember, with the new Gmail rules, you got to make sure you're emailing everybody in your database at least once every 30 days, okay? Everybody in your database has to be emailed at least once every 30 days. So if you build a list, a dynamic list of everybody who has not been emailed in 30 days, hey, you just wake up in the morning and just make sure that list is always at 0. right? If you want, if there's a big number of people in that database, run a report and try to figure out why those people are not getting regular comms through any automation, and try to see what your blind spot is. Okay, so there's a lot of really good things in the dynamic list right here. Has been emailed, has not been emailed. A lot of times people ask me, hey Milton, I don't want to over communicate. How do I get the right amount of communication and the frequency? Look, there's a thing right here that says prospect has been emailed 3 times in the last 2 days. Use this as a dynamic suppression list. Right? Like, so that, like, if every time you send an email, just automatically suppress this list. And then, so you never have to worry about emailing the same person more than once so they unsubscribe, etc. So dynamic segmentation is super important. I know I'm going through the examples really quickly, but if you want me to dig into any more examples or questions about this, you can ask me in the chat, okay? Segmentations are big. Progressive profiling. Basically what progressive profiling allows you to do is, like, once you come up with that architecture of what the most important information is, you can create forms in Pardot where you're asking for certain information at certain times from certain users. So let's say you run a LinkedIn campaign and you don't want to ask for more than 3 fields, because the more fields you ask, the lower conversion rate you are, and you know LinkedIn's ad rate is bonkers. So you want to ask for 3 fields. Using progressive profiling, which is included in every version of Pardot for free, basically what you can do is you can create one form for your LinkedIn ads, and then you can ask them for title. If somebody clicks on that ad, they go to your form. If you already have their title in Salesforce, then you can ask them for their annual revenue. If you already have your annual revenue, then you can ask for their, I don't know, whatever, their seniority. Right? And you can basically have one form that asks different information based on the information you already have. AKA talking to somebody like you already know them. If you're selling a tool or a service or a product that has an average selling price of over $20,000 or a lifetime value of over $20,000, and you're not talking to people like you know them, your competition is going to be very soon. Because your competition is probably working with me now. I'm kidding. But yeah, that's progressive profiling, super critical. I can go deeper into it if you want. Remember, new fields. Don't be scared of creating new fields. Marketing should have fields that they're creating in Pardot that do not sync with Salesforce. Marketing should have fields in Pardot they're not syncing with Salesforce. Why? It's a lagging indicator to me that marketing is actually in the experimental and growth phase. Because basically, we had a field that we tried out, like, I don't know, 90 days ago, of like how long you've been using Pardot. We created that field and we did not sync it to Salesforce. We just collected it on every form we had. Then we analyzed that data for 90 days and we saw, is there any correlation between that and the conversions? Then, when we decided there was, then we created a field in Salesforce, and then we retroactively synced all that data in. Then sales is like, oh my God, this is such a great field for us to have data with. But for every success, we have 4 that failed. But you don't want to sync to Salesforce every single time, because then you're creating, technical debt on the Salesforce side, and you're introducing new variables that you don't want. So don't be scared of new fields. I have newsletter opens. I have a field right now that I'm experimenting because I'm trying to show the ROI for these webinars, because, they take a lot of effort, and everybody's like, Milton, you just go on there and chat with people because you like attention. I'm like, no, the people like it. They buy things. But I have a field that I've created with them of amount of times they've registered for a webinar. And I'm trying to show correlation about how many webinars you sign up before you buy an ROI session. Hopefully it's 1 or 2. Right? So that's a new field that I created that's just in Pardot. Okay? This is where most people want to get to, right? Which I show the coolest things in the end, because most people really maybe are not ready for that yet, right? But what I like a lot, and you can do, is something called dynamic content in Pardot, right? So basically what that does is you can use dynamic content in Pardot landing pages, Pardot emails, and even your live website, no matter what the website platform is, like WordPress, anything like that, right? So, and this is I use the classic builder, but it's the same in Lightning too. So basically what you can do is you can say, hey, based on data that you have in Pardot or Salesforce, you can show specific content on your website. So for example, we have a page here for an example page here where it tells you to upgrade your plan or whatever, right? I don't know what this page example is, right? On the bottom of this page, we have a headshot and we have contact information of the assigned account owner. That is coming through dynamic content in Pardot. Okay? When we do our master classes, which we have done less of this year, if you go to our website for the master class, we have value props of why you should sign up for it. Like the reasons you should sign up for it. Let me see if I have an example here, right? This is our master class thing. I don't think we're doing any this year anymore, but like these are the different topics we're going to cover. And what we're doing is based on the selection that you made of how long you've been using Pardot, we are doing custom value propositions on that page. So it feels custom for how long you've been using it in your proficiency level. On this dynamic content, you can use data from Salesforce, Pardot, third-party provider, whatever you want. But why I'm showing it in the end is you have to have the data has to exist in the first place. So if you don't have the data, don't get excited about this because it's the coolest thing to do. Actually, I'm supposed to show you this and then get you to buy your plan and then tell you about the hard work afterwards. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, so this is dynamic content, right? So like, if we are, I don't know if they're still like, but like Spotify, they have a special page based on if you're a current subscriber or if you're a premium subscriber versus a paid subscriber. Their CTA changes. We have accounts where if we're trying to cross-sell or or upsell, the heading on their website changes based off of that. If you are selling a product or service where you have to get buy-in from multiple stakeholders like IT, sales, marketing, legal, right? And you have a complex product, that heading on your website changes based on what their title is from LinkedIn, right? So those are different ways that you can use dynamic content. You can use dynamic content in subject lines. You can use dynamic content in emails. You can use dynamic content for images. You can use dynamic content anywhere. If you're selling a product or tool that basically has any sort of vertical, you gotta use dynamic content, right? If you're selling into like healthcare versus financial, those two industries specifically and a lot of like titles, they love seeing a background image of like a hospital, or like a background image of like money, right? So like those are huge triggers. And you can create one piece of dynamic content and have that dynamic content follow all the way through to the email, to your website, to their landing page. So much to the fact that like, even if you have competitors that basically are narrowly competing for one industry, you can effectively compete against them because you're creating the illusion that you like align with just that industry. So dynamic content is awesome. I have examples here where we're putting the company's logo, so it shows that like, hey, we want to work with you, school district, and it puts the school district's logo on the landing page using a free open API. But dynamic content is awesome, and this is where most people probably want to get to when they say personalized content. Yeah? And this is probably some variation of this is why y'all bought Pardot and Salesforce in the first place. My wife, I would say literally one of the smartest people I've met in my life. She MBA from some fancy college, very computer science degree. She works at Dell. She always reminds me, she says, it's in enterprise, the buyer and the user are two different people. The buyer and the user are two different people. So like if you were the buyer of Pardot or Salesforce, you probably got sold on this. This type of personalization. If you're a user of Pardot, you're probably banging your head in the wall because you're like, hey, I want to do this, but in order to do that, there's a bunch of like nitty-gritty stuff that you have to do. Yeah? And we like to think we're the bridge to that. Basically, we can give you that turnkey experience without, doing it yourself. Okay, I'm going to talk about blind spots. I'm going to open it to questions. But basically, the couple of blind spots I want you all to think about is one, journey sprawl. Okay? Look, I would love if you got a SalesLabX subscription and then you had all the bandwidth in the world because all our plans are unlimited and I'll come in there and I'll help you do ROI and stuff like that. But the reality is we're expensive. We have a wait list. There's only a few people doing what we do, right? And you probably want to do this yourself at least for a little bit, right? You have to focus. You have to focus. So if you can't document your journey and you say, hey, Milton, we're all over the place and we're doing X, Y, Z and we're doing this and that, I call that journey sprawl. You're spraying and praying. You gotta get more disciplined, okay? You gotta get more disciplined. I am one of those people that think everything comes down to discipline, right? But you have to get more disciplined about narrowing down, focusing on one or two key events, and then hyper-focusing on that. If you're trying to personalize and collect data across 7 or 8 different activities, and you know what? And if we're being completely honest, most of y'all, the discipline doesn't come from y'all or the lack of discipline. It might come from your leadership. Yeah? So you have to make sure that you know how to manage up and buy some time and runway from your leadership to make sure that you can work on projects or parts of your funnel for 90 days at a time. So you have to have discipline around that and you have to make sure you don't have journey sprawl. You don't know how many times I go into an organization and they have 7 different form platforms. They're using hubs, they're using Pardot forms, they're using web to lead forms, they're using form handlers, they're using something in WordPress, and I'm like, God, I'm not saying that it's the end all be all, but if you're using 7 different form platforms, all you're doing is you're making donations to Zuckerberg and that Sergey Brin at Google, right? Because the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So you got to make sure that you narrow down your journey, right? And if you book an ROI session with me, I can tell you where your journey is sprawling. Have discipline around that, and then think about your data acquisition often and early. What are the 3 pieces of data that you want to collect, and how are you going to collect them? And is there anything stopping you from getting them? And here's another thing. If you're leaving it up to a sales rep to update that piece of information, go ahead and give up on life now. Okay? I'm a very jaded human being when it comes to sales reps because I was one. But think about your data acquisition strategy as much as you think about your data execution strategy. And I know it's frustrating because you think it's a Salesforce admin's job or the ops job or data's job, and that's not your job. Here's the deal. We have a bunch of Salesforce admins. We have a bunch of ops people. They don't think end-to-end strategy a lot of times. Or they don't have the bandwidth to, or they don't have the execution ability to, or they don't have the leadership buy-in to. Right? So if you're the one who's getting graded on those metrics, you have to think about the data acquisition strategy. You have to. Okay? Okay. Last 2 things, and I'll open it to questions. Reporting. I end almost every session I talk about with this is that if you don't have visibility to your data, don't start personalizing yet. Get visibility to your reporting first. Okay? Only personalize on what you have reporting on for already. If you don't have reporting on it, don't personalize on it, because how do you know if it works or not? Okay? So make sure you have reporting, and then make sure that you're iterating on a regular basis. So a lot of people will come to us and say, hey, Milton, why don't you all sell projects or hourly based work? And I'm like, hey, because the game you're playing, I'm going to set the wrong standard if I sell you a bucket of hours or a project, because it doesn't actually work like that. It's actually an iterative thing that you have to do on a regular basis. You're doing a bunch of work right now. You're just not doing it in a way that's very focused and iterative. So try to think about that iterative nature of what you do. And yes, I am zooming through these last slides, right? Don't just look at the data. Listen to recordings, talk to sales, do interviews, talk to your stakeholders. It's not just data. It's not just qualitative. It's also quantitative, all right? I love listening to recordings and watching demos of the accounts that I manage. It helps me out a lot. Yeah. And last thing, before we talk about questions, is just remember, have a lot of discipline. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. Okay. Cool. I will answer a couple of questions in the chat, and then I will open it to questions internally. Scott asks, if I start an engagement studio program with multiple progressive emails, and a new person is added to the dynamic list, they get the first email, or do they get whatever email that there is at that date? Either, Scott. So whenever you build an engagement studio, which is basically like an automated drip program, you can decide whether new people who get added to that are automatically added to the first one, or if you have a date based. But Scott, my default answer is going to be the first email that's on the drip, right? So basically, Scott, you know, if you have a pricing page on your website, right, and you want to say like, hey, if somebody comes and visits our pricing page, I want to, every time somebody visits this pricing page and they don't have an open opportunity with us, I want to send out the same 3 emails, 1 email every 2 days, right? Then you would build a dynamic list and engagement studio to deploy on that. And Scott's asking, effectively, Scott, like, do they start at the second email or the first email? They all start at the first email. Scott, hopefully that answered your question. Allison, can you elaborate a bit on the last statement? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Love it. When I go into an organization, remember, because we have, like, we can build unlimited automations or whatever for organizations, I go into a lot of organizations and Salesforce instances where basically a sales leader or somebody has just, like, thrown everything against the wall. They're like, they have a flow for this, they have a required fields for this. I call it technical debt, right? And it's like 3 or 4 leaders. They've all done one random thing. They've created all these bunch of different fields, and they've automated things they shouldn't have done. You know, they just like read something on LinkedIn and then do it, right? So it's like, what I mean by that is that, like, there's this temptation to, like, over-automate, over-segment. You know, every time an opportunity goes to this stage, I want these 3 fields to be required. Oh, but now it causes some other downstream impact. Like, just just because you have the ability to do something, you shouldn't, right? Just because you can cold email somebody off of Zoom info doesn't mean you should. That's what I mean, right? Right now, I guess it's Karl Marx that said, modern capitalism is like, it's usually, it's not that you can't do something, it's that you're doing too much. You're doing too much and not in the right area, right? So, like, that's the thing, right? Don't just, like, yeah. I see a lot of people A/B testing subject lines because that has built into Pardot. I don't care about A/B testing subject lines. I care about A/B testing form fields. You know what I mean? You know what? Just because Pardot gives you the ability to A/B test out of the box doesn't mean that's what you should be spending your time doing. I love that. Usually people don't ask me questions on my strategy, but I love that, Allison. Thank you. Okay. Danielle is on here all the time, so I'll answer your question here, and I'll put you to the bottom, Danielle. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. What do you mean by personalization? Yeah. I don't. You know, I answered some of those questions. If anybody has a new question, you can ask it in the chat. But I want to show you the HubSpot example that I gave y'all that I like. So HubSpot spends a lot of time and energy on content. And a lot of the orgs that I go to, they try to get leadership to justify their content build outs because they know that helps. They feel it, right? So what you can see they do here is that they have what we call rivers and tributaries, right? So they have these, they have all of these pieces of content here that are just organic pieces of content, okay? Now, one thing you can notice right here in the URL is they're tracking where every piece of content is coming from. Like you can see right here, it came from the CTA nav resources, right? So now they know how to spend more time on there versus organic or whatever, right? If you go here, most of their pieces of content have a upsell to a download asset. I picked the, maybe I'm cookie, but let's go here. Let's go here. You see this right here? It says get started with the free campaign assessment for free. If I click on it, you see how it's tracking where it's coming from? So they know that piece of content is driving that content, that traffic, right? This is a good example of how they're leveraging UTM parameters and all of that. Right? If I click on Get the Trends, you see the download right here. This download is only asking for one field. If they click Next, it still records the email address. But if you abandon cart, they're going to like still have your email. Right? This is a multi-step form that you can do in Pardot. That's a good example of that. And if you do fill this out, there's a hidden field in here that's capturing the piece of content that got you that. I don't want to get into that, but like this is a good example of how they keep justifying their content and marketing budget. Yeah. Any questions, comments, concerns? Thank you, Crystal. If y'all want to chat and you are not sure where to get started and you have some budget left over, feel free to book an ROI session with me, 60 minutes. And bring anybody else with you too. Salesforce admins, Pardot admins, leadership, salespeople, blah, blah, blah. Right? And then I can yell at them all at one time to do better. No, I'm kidding. All right, y'all. It's been fun. Make sure you follow me on LinkedIn and give me some nice compliments if you aren't already. Y'all have fun.